Okay, given what's going on in the world, let's talk about the markets a little bit. I'm talking about some other stuff along the way too, but the more immediate concern at the moment is the markets, the more immediate issue. Um, Basically, as probably everyone knows in the meantime, the markets have been falling for several days, quite hard recently. That didn't surprise me one bit, aside from the fact that Russia is invading Ukraine. Okay, the reality is I have been expecting a downturn for a while, and the reality is also that over the last few days we've had a couple of days where there were big up moves at the end of the day to try to make the end of day numbers look very good as possible anyway. And the reality is that the very next morning those big up moves were canceled out, and more so than that again already. And today was a very interesting day, which is kind of why I decided to start doing these videos today, because it was a pretty wild day, and the net effect of it was still to the downside. Not a good sign. Okay. Bottom line is the market actually started lower than it ended yesterday. Then they tried to get it back up there to zero again, and they did make it in the afternoon. They punched it way up, and I want to emphasize here, it looked like an absolutely classic bear market punch-up. The way this typically works, the way it has typically worked in the past, is that for bearing in mind, first of all, that the biggest bounces happen in bear markets, not in bull markets. And the reason why is because people see all this negative news, and then something that comes along that is perceived as positive, and they say, hooray! And up it goes. Trouble is, because of the nature of the environment, it doesn't last, and so the market comes right back down again eventually. Okay? The reason I'm pointing this out today is because today was a particularly crass version of that, in that the market shot up like crazy, held on for just a few minutes, and then came right back down again, hard. And it did so twice in less than a day. Usually it lasts a little longer than that, often more than a day. This time around, it went up hard, came right back down again, went up hard a while later again, although much less so, and then came right back down again before the end of the day yet. Okay, not a good sign. And then at the end of the day it came all the way back down again, and then the traders were just fighting to try to prevent it from going to a new low for the day. Bearing in mind, remember, I said the day started well below zero. They were at that point just trying to stay away from going to yet another new low for the day. They just barely managed to do that, and still closed well below zero. Okay? In other words, it's still a weak market. There is more weakness to come, and I strongly suspect that the weakness is going to last a little while yet, minimum, just from the Ukraine situation, because Mr. Putin isn't going to give up anytime soon. Okay? I've seen this coming for quite a while. You know, I've known Mr. Putin's attitude for a long, long time. Not that I actively follow him, but I follow media that commented on what he was saying along the way. Okay, along with other people in the world as well, leaders in the world. And the reality is that, you know, he's been saying for quite a while he wants to integrate Ukraine back into the Russian situation. The reason for it could not be simpler, bearing in mind Putin is, shall we say, a strong leader. Okay, you know, one of the kinds who doesn't give up on things easily, and he's made sure he could stay in office. Okay, and the bottom line is that he had a pro-Putin leader in Ukraine for several years, up until a few years ago, and then the Ukrainians themselves ousted that leader and replaced him with a pro-Western leader, and they had elections along the way too. That's part of how they did that, but they had elections in the meantime too. Okay, and so a new leader stood for election at that time. The leader they currently have is a younger man than that, but he's also very pro-Western, and Mr. Putin is trying to ensure that that government gets replaced by a pro-Putin government again. That's the one thing that's going on near term. It's the reason why Putin will keep going, okay? Unfortunately, all of these peace protests that are going on all over the world will not have much effect. Basically none, okay? Putin is going to completely ignore them. Not unlike along the lines of what happened after 9/11, when George W. Bush, the younger President Bush, announced that he was going to invade Iraq, okay? And there were all kinds of protests back then, too, against that, and he just simply said, I respectfully disagree, and went ahead and did it anyway. Putin didn't even bother with, I respectfully disagree. He just simply went ahead and did it, and he's not going to stop. Okay, that's the near-term situation. The long-term situation, the longer-term situation, better said, and this is the situation that has been developing for far longer than the immediate Russia versus Ukraine situation. And this is from within the United States itself, but because the United States is a leading country in the world, it will affect pretty much everyone in the world when the situation fully develops, not that far down the road, which is why I'm bringing it up now already, okay, is that, you know, the United States government has been adding to the national debt of the United States on an ongoing basis for a very long time already, basically decades, okay. There were a couple of years in the late 90s where they ran annual surpluses, and they were saying at the time, oh hooray, if we can keep this up, we'll be in great shape, okay. And that statement was true. If they could keep it up, they would be in great shape. But I saw what was going on at the time. They had a bubble boom going on in the stock market. The stock market was going exponential, and it was a bubble economy as well. It was not sustainable, and certainly the exponential stock market was not sustainable. That was evident to me at the time. And so the way I put it at the time was that the stock market would not hold up. It would come back down again, which it did in the early 2000s, okay? And once that happened, we would be back into deficits again within a not too distant future after the late 90s. Okay, it only took a couple of years after that, actually. And in all likelihood, those deficits would be bigger than ever before. Not only did they end up being bigger than ever before, they stayed that way, okay, for years and years and years and years and years, okay. Bottom line is, well, they were bigger than ever, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger as time went on too, to the point where, for the first time during the Obama years, we had trillion-dollar annual deficits to deal with the economic downturn at the time, and in more recent times, we did it again, okay. In fact, they were not just trillion-dollar deficits these last few years, they were multi-trillion-dollar annual deficits these last few years. Bigger than ever. The reason I'm bringing this up is because, you see, the way it works with a normal consumer debt is it's going exponential in the correct direction, downward towards zero, okay? What this basically means is you start paying it off with the first payment, which is usually within a month or two after the loan goes out, and then you continue to make payments until the loan is paid off, okay, with each payment having a principal portion of it. A principal payment is a part of the payment. Okay? That goes up slowly at first and then ever more quickly as time goes on, and toward the end of the loan it's going up very quickly until you're paying off principal very rapidly as you head towards zero, and then the loan goes exponentially towards zero until you've paid it off and there's no more loans and you owe no more interest. Unfortunately, what we've been doing with the public debt in the United States, especially the national debt, is the exact opposite. Okay? We have been adding to it and adding to it and adding to it and adding to it and adding to it over the course of time in ever greater amounts. Okay? I saw this dynamic going on many years ago already, and because I know how exponentials work due to my background and training, I knew that meant that the national debt in particular was on an exponential track in the up direction, which it has been. It has continued to be on that track. And the bottom line also is that since we have continued to add even more debt to it every year on an active basis, we helped the exponential along. Okay? So what has been happening is the national debt has been going up at an ever faster rate as time has gone on, which meant that eventually we were going to hit the knee of the exponential, but in the wrong direction, going up. That happened not that long ago, okay? And bearing in mind that President Trump's stimulus package, every penny of which was borrowed money, and President Biden's stimulus package, every penny of which was borrowed money, helped that along immensely. It basically put it over the top. It looks like President Trump's probably did, and President Biden's definitely did. Okay? I will add, by the way, the deficit spending happened under both Republican and Democratic presidents. In fact, one of the biggest initial violators in the more recent times along the way was George W. Bush, a Republican, and the initial big violator years ago was Ronald Reagan, who was also a Republican president. So don't talk about, oh, it's just the Democrats doing it. No, it's both parties. Okay? They've been doing it more or less in equal measure. Okay? The bottom line is they just dealt with what they needed to deal with at the time. I might add Obama's deficits were also very big, but my point is it wasn't just the Democrats and it wasn't just Obama. Okay? Reagan was the first big violator, George W. Bush was the next big violator, and Donald Trump was also quite a big violator during the 4 years he was in. Okay? Necessity of the times, if they wanted to keep things going. The problem is that because they kept that going like that, okay, it was inevitable that the debt would eventually go past the knee of the exponential, which it has done in the meantime. And so in the not too distant future, irrespective of what happens in Ukraine, the United States national debt is going to go exponential in the up direction, which means it will start taking off like crazy. And by the way, that would happen even if they would have budget surpluses from now on, which, by the way, is unlikely under the circumstances, especially as they are developing with the situation in Ukraine. Okay? But even if they were doing that, okay, they wouldn't be able to keep up with that anymore, because the national debt is, in the meantime, just due to compounding overall, because it's been compounding on itself for such a long time already, is going up at about $300 billion a month. Okay? And it just crossed $30 trillion total on February 2nd, 2022. By the way, as verified by the government itself, as verified by the Treasury Department. Okay? They made that public at the time. So the basic bottom line is the debt is now high enough and growing quickly enough that there's no way to get ahead of it anymore. So it is only a matter of time before it will overwhelm the system. And my point is then the United States, and pretty much the rest of the world also, because the United States is the leading country in the world, at least for the time being yet, is going to have a very major problem on its hands, completely separate from the situation in Ukraine. Okay? and that's going to be a far more impactful situation because it involves an exponential going upwards, and it's going to be a far more long-term situation overall. Not that the Ukraine situation is going to end anytime soon. I really don't think it will, unfortunately, but the United States national debt going exponential is going to be an even bigger problem once that becomes apparent to people. And so, word to the wise, there's more difficulties ahead, and you know, as best one can do, one should be preparing for that. Okay? So anyway, that's my basic initial message about the bigger picture for now. I will get into more detail later, but that's enough for one video, and especially an introductory video with regard to the things that I plan to be talking about in the future. So enough for now. Talk to you soon again.